and said, his dad called him and said, "Aren't you worried this will hurt you?" He said, "This is America. We believe in the truth. The truth matters. Right matters. And that's what we want, the plain truth." The managers also increased the case even further for witnesses and documents. The granular discussion of the White House meeting, the infamous meeting where Bolton said to Fiona Hill that he didn't want to be part of any drug deal, it was clear who was the chief cook and bottle washer in this whole horrible scheme, this whole evil scheme. Mick Mulvaney, because Bolton said, "Mulvaney, you and Sunderland are doing this. I'm not part of it." Why can't we hear from Mulvaney? He knew exactly what Trump did. He knew exactly what Trump's motivations were. He knew who else was in on the deal. There seemed to be many of them. So it was incredible. And one more thing stood out. The managers were anticipating the counter-arguments from the President's counsel. Since the President's counsel goes second, they wanted to go forward. I thought Rep. Nadler did an excellent job showing how the President doesn't need to have committed a criminal offense to be impeached and removed from office, reflecting on what impeachment meant to the Founding Fathers. Rep. Garcia explained how the President's insinuations about the Bidens are baseless, anticipating that the President's lawyers would focus on the Bidens. And Representative Schiff discredited the absurd idea that President Trump cared deeply about corruption in foreign countries. It was a brilliant strategy. If the President's counsel now get up and make those arguments, every Republican senator and the American people will have heard already why those arguments are utter nonsense. So in short, the House managers have already set a very high bar for the President's counsel to meet. They've laid out a series of facts, none of which are in dispute. As the President's counsel prepares to mount their defense tomorrow, I hope they don't just sound like President Trump's tweets, that they don't simply resort to finger-pointing, name-calling, and debunk conspiracies. As the American people know, this moment is far too important for that. So after the very compelling case that the House managers are presenting, boy, oh boy, the President's counsel have their work cut out for them. Now, as you know, every day we hear a different story from the senators, from many Senate Republicans, about why they oppose a fair trial and why we can have witnesses and documents. It's usually some shiny object that has nothing to do with the actual facts and law of the case. So now here's the latest one. And that is, it'll take too long if we do it later. That's the diversion of the day. They have one a day. And so let me say this. First, we heard the Republicans all vote to delay things. The Mitch McConnell scheme was to say, because he knew that a lot of Republicans were seriously thinking and are seriously thinking of witnesses and of documents, they said, let's not do it now. Let's hear the arguments and then do it. And now they're saying we don't have enough time to do it. Talk about talking out of both sides of your mouth. Holy moly. So, but it's a very flimsy excuse. First, as I said, Democrats attempted to settle this question at the beginning of the trial so there'd be no delay. We warned them. You say you want to do it later? It's going to take longer. But second, it's not going to cause much more of a delay. They point back to the House and said it will take months and months and months and months. But if subpoenas are issued from the Senate, by definition, the subpoenas will be bipartisan and they will be signed by the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. And people and those who are subject to those subpoenas are expected to comply. Mr. Bolton has already announced he'd testify if the Senate issued a subpoena. He's not in the executive branch. So executive privilege cannot be used against him because it can't be used to prevent a witness who's willing to testify. But even if witnesses don't comply with a subpoena, and those who work for the president might not, despite the bravery of people like Hill and Taylor, they would be given very prompt judicial review given the urgency and the stakes of an impeachment trial. And finally, there's a simple answer. When our Republican friends claim it would take too long, they really want a fair trial, go tell the president not to invoke executive privilege. He's the one delaying it, not us. And if this is as serious as it should be to them, they'll go to the president and say, we don't want executive privilege invoked. If the president believes he did nothing wrong, that everything's perfect, he should have nothing to fear from these witnesses and documents. They're his appointees. The documents are written by people who are allies of him. In Watergate, President Nixon considered invoking executive privilege to prevent White House aides from testifying in the Senate, but quickly realized it would be untenable, as it is here now. The Senate Watergate Committee, on a bipartisan basis, told President Nixon they would not accept an assertion of executive privilege to shield wrongdoing. So the bottom line is the argument that we shouldn't call witnesses because it would provoke a fight over executive privilege or take too long is flimsy. If you believe the Senate ought to hear all the facts, you can say so and vote so. And if you do, stand by it. Well, don't say I really want witnesses, but it'll take too long. That's not the case. The bottom line, we're seeking the truth at a momentous time in the American Republic. It is on the shoulders of 4 Republican senators to join us in demanding it. We've made the argument forcefully. The American people have made the argument forcefully that they want the truth. Will 4 Republican senators, just 4, rise to the occasion, do their duty to their Constitution, to their country, to seek the truth? Who's next? Senator Gillibrand.
Thank you, Chuck. Thank you. Over the past few days, my colleagues and I have listened to the House managers lay out a very strong case against President Trump. In incredible detail, the House managers have laid out every facet of President Trump's schemes and misconduct. The case is overwhelming. President Trump orchestrated a pressure campaign against Ukraine in an attempt to strong-arm their government into launching investigations into the Bidens. He withheld a meeting with President Zelensky. He froze military aid to Ukraine even as they were engaged in hostilities with Russia. He did this to try to hurt one of his political opponents and help his own re-election campaign. The case against President Trump is rock solid. It's clear. It's undeniable. It is the truth. So I'm surprised when I hear my colleagues complain that there's nothing new. I mean, it's really quite hypocritical. They complain there's nothing new, and they say this after they voted more than 10 times not to be able to receive additional testimony and additional evidence. To my colleagues who are using this argument, don't bury your head in the sand and then complain it's dark. They have every ability to call witnesses, to agree unanimously, as Senator Schumer has said. If they mean what they say, which I highly doubt, then they should want to hear something new. Let's hear from John Bolton, who has relevant information to the heart of the matter. He has firsthand knowledge of these events and who has already volunteered to testify. Let's hear from Mick Mulvaney, the one who said there was a quid pro quo, and to get over it. I think it's absurd that Senate Republicans are unwilling to hear more testimony. We need more documents. We need the documents from the State Department. We need the documents from the Department of Defense. We need the documents from OMB. My Republican colleagues will have another chance to do their constitutional duty. After we hear from President Trump's attorneys, they will have another opportunity to vote on witnesses and documents. I urge them to do so. And I urge them to keep this very simple fact in mind. History will remember those who stood up for our values. History will remember who stood up for our Constitution. History will remember who has the independence and righteousness to do the right thing at the right time. This is about light. This is about truth. This is about finding out what happened and doing our constitutional duty. Anything less is a failure.
Senator Heinrich.
We heard a lot of facts from the House managers over the last several days. We heard about violations of the truth, and we heard about violations of the law. But when the framers put impeachment as a remedy into our system, they did it for very specific reasons. They did it because they were fearful that there would be a president who would put aside duty and country for what was good personally for that president. That's what abuse of power is. And they were specifically worried about a president who would abuse their official power for their own personal reelection. We heard from Ambassador Sondland and many others in their own words yesterday about this president setting aside the American national interest and our national security interest in an attempt to put his thumb on the scale of the 2020 election. That is exactly the picture that the House managers have painted. I believe that my constituents and that all Americans deserve to hear from the people who are in the room, deserve to hear from the people who have firsthand knowledge of those conversations with this president, deserve to read the documents communicating those decisions. That's what this is really about.
Thank you. Senator Markey.
Thank you. Adam Schiff and the House managers yesterday laid out a blistering, scalding indictment of Donald Trump and his activities orchestrated from the Oval Office. We heard that 15,000 Ukrainians had died in a war with Russia. We heard that 10% of the defense budget of Ukraine was money from the United States. And we heard that the president had decided to squeeze Ukraine, squeeze President Zelensky to not receive the defense money they needed to make sure that more Ukrainians did not die in that war, unless he investigated his political opponent. What we are looking for is a trial with witnesses. A trial without witnesses is a cover-up. That's where we are. The Republican argument is, the Trump argument is, you cannot investigate him. You cannot indict him. You cannot impeach him. We are not going to cooperate. We are not going to give you the witnesses which can corroborate what all of the evidence yesterday laid out as the case against the president. You can only imagine how much more damning the charges would be, the evidence would be, if we heard from Mick Mulvaney, if we heard from John Bolton, if we had the emails. It would be conclusory that a conspiracy had been orchestrated out of the White House. The proof would be incontrovertible if we had the witnesses and we had the documents. There would be an exclamation point at the end of the sentence, the bow that wraps it all together, the nail in Trump's political coffin. All of this would happen if we had the witnesses. That's why the Republicans are stonewalling. That's why Donald Trump does not want to give us access to the witnesses and access to that documentation. This is what it is all about. And we are going to continue to fight every single day so that the American people can hear all of the evidence. A trial is a search for the truth. You cannot reach the truth if you're denied the witnesses and denied the documents that make it possible for the American people to hear that case. That's what's on trial. The Republican Party, the Republican Senate. Will they stand up for democracy? Will they stand up for the right for the American people to have a full and fair trial of their president as he undermined the American Constitution?
Thank you, Senator Markey. Go ahead.
If this argument about privilege and a protracted legal fight sort of gains traction in the Republican caucus, would you be willing to narrow some of your subpoenas to fully skirt around the executive privilege issue? If, for instance, Bill Taylor's note or Morrison notes, those aren't covered by executive privilege. Would you be willing to put out more narrow subpoenas to show that there's no legitimate privilege fight going on?
Okay. Well, we believe we need to get a full and fair trial at such a solemn and serious moment. At minimum, the 4 witnesses we've asked for and the 4 sets of documents we've asked for. That's the first step. Will Republicans come forward and say we ought to have them? And once they do, we will still fight for these, but we'll listen to what they have to say. But it's jumping the gun to say, what would you be willing to, when we don't have Republicans yet willing to just say yes to the initial request for witnesses and documents? Yes, 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 please. I'll get to you next.
Go.
A question on strategy for next week with the question period. Will
Yes.
you all be compiling your questions together so similar ones are asked at the same time, or
Yeah.
is each senator going to be allowed?
No, I expect there are going to be a whole lot of questions from a whole lot of senators. And it'll be a very good period to bring out the facts and bring out the truth and ask questions that people have on both sides of the aisle. Yes.
You talked about how the subpoenas with the signature of the Chief Justice would be very compelling.
Yes.
But as a matter of law, I guess, can the Chief Justice, as the presiding officer here, actually rule that these subpoenas must be obeyed? And then whatever litigious argument, is
Well,
history?
Look, there could be a litigious argument, but I think it'll be dismissed rather quickly because it doesn't have much bearing, as Watergate and previous precedent shows. Yes.
Senator Lisa Murkowski, who's a moderate Republican, as you know, and he would be critical in supporting a vote for witnesses and documents, said just yesterday that the House didn't even decide to use the time, to take the time that it would go to the courts, and now they're asking the Senate to do that very thing. If you haven't convinced her, are you concerned that you haven't even got your message across to some of the most moderate Republicans are going to?
I think the message has gotten across very strongly. The American people are overwhelmingly with us. The House managers are making the case, and we're going to continue to make it. This is a heavy moment, and you don't know how this sense of constitutional and historical responsibility weighs on the shoulders. We know we'll never get Trump. We know we'll never get McConnell. We know they'll pressure Republican senators. But 4 Republican senators can step forward and say that we need witnesses and documents, and there are 12 or 13 who have never said a bad word about witnesses and documents. Yes.
Senator, just a follow-up on the previous question. In several court cases, including one decided yesterday in the Seventh Circuit, the Trump administration is simply ignoring court orders that go against them. They're just ignoring them. What makes you think that, given that that's already happening, that the White House would comply with any orders?
I think this is going to, it'll be bipartisan, it'll be signed by the Chief Justice, and this is a different situation than the House. The House is the prosecutor, but this is the responsibility given to us by the Constitution to get all the facts out. There's nothing like it. Every precedent is on our side, and I believe it will happen quickly, and that's what most of the lawyers I speak to quickly are about. Next.
What kind of arguments are you expecting to hear from the White House lawyers?
Well, I hope the arguments are on the facts and on the merits. So far, at least the arguments when we talked about specific witnesses and documents were too much ad hominem and finger pointing. I said when I heard their arguments that if it was an actual jury with 12 men and women in the jury box, summary judgment would have been ruled for the House managers because they didn't answer any of the facts in any of the law. Let's hope they stick to the facts and the law. Yes.
Senator Schumer, President Trump this morning called Saturday the Death Valley of TV. Are you expecting the White House lawyers to
It's up to them. Remember, the reason we have that Saturday is Mitch McConnell's resolution. He should take it up with Mitch McConnell. But it'll be up to the Senate lawyers, the president's lawyers, what they want to do. That's up to them, not us. Yes.
You talked about shifting public opinion. Are you looking at public polls, or are you looking at private polls? And do you believe now a majority of Americans want to see Trump removed from office?
Well, the public polls show that. I don't know that's the fact, but I will tell you this: it's overwhelming on witnesses and documents among Democrats, Republicans, and Independents. Overwhelming, private and public. Okay, last question right there.
Why did you decide to pick Governor Whitmer to do the response for the State of the Union?
Well, Speaker Pelosi and I thought she'd be a great choice. She's done a wonderful job in Michigan. She's from the Midwest. She speaks to the practical things that working families care about, like fix the roads. I think she'll be great, and I think Congressmember Escobar will be great as well. Okay? Yes.
ABC has just gotten a video in which President Trump is seen, it's apparently President Trump with Lev Parnas, Igor Fruman, the Giuliani associates are talking about, and he's seen talking about taking out Ambassador Yovanovitch. He says to a small group at this dinner, get rid of her. He's heard saying, get her out tomorrow. I don't care. Get her out tomorrow. Take her out, okay? Your reaction?
Well, I haven't seen that, so I wouldn't comment on that yet. But I can say the granularity of the description of the despicable treatment of this prized, wonderful public servant, Ambassador Yovanovitch, I think stuck in people's minds again. And that's another point here. The detail and the fact-by-fact presentation of the House managers was compelling. And again, our Republican colleagues had to sit through something like this for the very first time. And so I think there's tremendous sympathy for Ambassador Yovanovitch from one end of America to the other. My guess is in the hearts of many of our Republican senators. So I don't know that thing, but I do know that Yovanovitch was terribly treated. Thank you, everybody.
Senator Schumer, what moments, specifically in Schiff's comments, do you think Republicans were responding to?
The end was amazing. Some of them said it.
So we don't have my audio on it?
He hit his head pretty good on this, so.
Well, we got lights. We got lights. Oh, no. Oh, it's funny.
DOLDYMYR. Except there are like 3 other ways to spell it.
The woman leaving was, she was
You have it talk in Spanish, there's like 3, 4 different versions.
that was good.
Because some of the names get, in Spanish, they have strict rules about when a name can be translated to like the Spanish language version. So like Zelensky in Spanish.
Lynn's is taking the heat with all the things.
That one is? When that's why, but it's a rule.
Yeah, you got your hand on there.
Especially, I'm not gonna even question.
It's a lot of weight.
Also, 2 Ys.
Well, I mean, built for it. They would've put a handle on it.
The melt.
When I land, I always feel like feel the vibration and stuff, of flying, sliding over an apartment and stuff.
Yeah. Do it more often than not.
Yeah.
True.
Wilmington.